Stephanie, thank you for having all of us here. So I originally ran for council in 2015. I had some previous experience working in local and state government. Then I went to law school and I was a practicing attorney at a firm that my father founded probably about 40 years ago doing personal injury law. And I was actually at a conference in Montreal when the previous council member decided that he was going to leave and take a job with the county. I forget the exact job, something in the planning department. So I had not worked in government for a few years. I was very happy practicing law and advocating for injured people. And then I thought about it, and I really wanted to advocate for the residents of Delaware District, the neighborhood I grew up in my whole life. So my whole life I've lived in North Buffalo. When I was in law school, I lived in the Elmwood Village. So I thought it was an outstanding opportunity to fight for the neighborhood, to help improve the quality of life and do things in the neighborhood that I'm from and that I've lived in my whole life. Now, David Rivera.
Thank you very much. I decided to run in 2007 after the council member, the incumbent, decided not to run. His name was Nick Bonifacio. I was part of a committee that was vetting possible candidates. I had no interest in running for elective office at that point. The candidates that we interviewed kind of dropped off. And at the very end, we had no candidate. And they looked to me and they said, "Dave, why don't you run?" Now, I was reluctant because I worked in the Buffalo Police Department. I was a detective sergeant. I was working on my pension. I was doing really well, had a command underneath me. I was a supervisor. However, when they looked to me, they said, "Well, let me speak to my wife and to my spiritual leader, and I'll get back to you." Well, I did speak to my wife, and I said, "If I run for elective office, I'm going to need you to be there to massage me when I get home after the tough days. Can I count on you being there?" And she said yes. And so then I spoke to my spiritual leader, and he said, "Dave, you could always go back to the Buffalo Police Department." And so I looked at it as an opportunity to address the needs of the neighborhoods. At that point, the west side, you could see a lot of disinvestment, a lot of blight. People were leaving the area, fleeing and going into the suburbs or the first string suburbs. So I ran a very tough campaign against a very good opponent, Peter Savage. He became a judge, and I supported him when he ran for judge, and he became county legislator and chairman of the county legislature, and comes from a great family. We ran a very tough race. On election day, I won by 76 votes as an underdog. I was told, "You can't win." Everywhere I looked to, "Dave, there's no way you can win. You don't have the support of the mayor. You don't have the support of the former mayor. You don't have the support of the block clubs. You don't have the support." But what I did do is I knocked on doors and I met people and I asked them what were their concerns, and I reinforced it every opportunity I had to go back and knock on those same doors, to the point where people said, "Don't knock on my door anymore. You have my vote." And I stopped knocking on that door, but I kept on working. As I said, it was a very close race. I pinched myself right after the election because I was overspent, more volunteers than I had. But it was the people in the district that made the difference. And for those that say you can't win, I'm a perfect example. Yes, you can if you work hard. And since then, we've done great work on the west side. There's developers here that are investing on the west side, the same as in the Elmwood Village in different parts of the city. It's a good time to be in government. We're starting to see some development. There's some upsides and some downsides with the development. Certain people are being displaced because of the development, and that's a concern that we have. We want to make sure it's affordable for people that want to stay in the neighborhood as well. So I just feel fortunate. I represent 6 of the parks, and I want to commend Olmsted and Stephanie for the great work you do in keeping our parks. There was a point where the city wanted to take back the parks, and we were fearful. We were really fearful. Nobody does as good a job as Olmsted in taking care of our parks, and we fought hard to make sure that the city did not take back the Olmsted Park. I only wish that you had more parks to take care of. So with that, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Mitch Nowakowski, who worked in my office as an intern, and he jumped right into the fire. Thank you.
Thank you. The one thing that I did learn from David right off the bat was to knock on doors. He has that officer knock that could wake the dead. You know, you gotta knock really hard to make sure that you talk to every constituent. But I also learned, you know, that's how it's done, especially in local politics. It's not your Facebook page, no matter how cool it looks. It's really rolling up your sleeves and talking to every single voter and having a great ground game. But I knew that I wanted to get involved in politics at a really young age. I was one of those kids that was like, my daycare was my grandparents. So sitting around the kitchen table and reading the newspaper by the time I was in the 3rd grade was something that had to be done. So my favorite section was the city and region section, and that's where I got to see all the current issues and got to see where leadership really was done, and that how politics can affect everyday people, and how it can advance communities and other folks. And I went to college at Buffalo State College, and I majored in urban planning and political science, and I was able to then become an intern for Sean Ryan, and then transfer to David Rivera, and then to council staff, and then I was able to run for office, to replace David Franczak, who had been in office for over 30 years. And as some folks know, that my district is extremely interesting. It goes all the way from Allentown to Marine Drive, the Old First Ward, into Broadway Fillmore, and into Genesee Moselle. So I represent the east and west sides of Buffalo, and I feel like it's a complete honor to do so. But politics sometimes was always in my blood. The first race I ever worked on I was 17 years old, and I worked on my town supervisor's race, and making sure that we got every single person out to vote, because our opponent had in a small town had spent $100,000. So it was a good way to wash someone out. And on that election night, we were up 105, and then after absentee ballots, I think that she ended up winning by like 80 votes. So I know how it is to be in a close election.
Well, excellent. How's that sun? A little bright? Okay, good. So we've been talking a lot about where we are with their careers, and as far as the parks are concerned, I just wanted to know, I know you've complimented Olmsted, but is there like a favorite area within your own district that you would like to tell us about, and that you find that you advocate for? And I will say that I know that every single person here there are certain advocacy issues that pop up with regard to the park system. Joel gets to deal with the 198 quite a bit. David, we just went through the renaming, or actually the turning back to Prospect Park, the original name for that park. And Mitch has to deal with Days Park, which is a mixed kind of use area where there's a school that wants to just kind of use the park as their own private playground, and then the neighbors get mad, and so he has to sit through a whole bunch of meetings where parents and neighbors fight with each other over grass. So let's start with you, Joel. What's your favorite part?
Thank you very much. My favorite place is actually right here around Hoyt Lake. I run through Delaware Park all the time, but I really enjoy in the morning going through Delaware Park, going over the bridge on Delaware Avenue, then cutting through to Hoyt Lake and running around here. It's so peaceful and tranquil in the morning. It's definitely like my favorite part of the day is just running and going through the parks. And just to piggyback on what Councilmember Rivera was saying earlier about the Conservancy and Stephanie, the Conservancy does such an amazing job maintaining the parks, and it's people underestimate how difficult of a job it is, not only taking care of the parks, but figuring out how to finance it, coming up with the money to do it. There's a ton of staff members, and a lot of people, when it comes to donating to philanthropic causes, a lot of people forget about parks. There's a lot of causes that more directly affect people. So if someone had a family member who died of cancer or Alzheimer's, they feel more emotionally connected to that, and any day they'll cut a check and do that. But for some reason, a lot of people just think parks are free and they should be free, and they just don't necessarily think of donating to them. So I know just not only maintaining them, but raising money from private individuals, from foundations, and trying to deal with local officials, state officials, federal officials. It's very tough thing, and you guys do a great job trying to balance everything.
Thank you very much. There are so many memories that come from different parks. As a young child growing up, it used to be LaSalle Park in Front Park where we used to go play on the monkey bars and spend a lot of time there. And as adolescents and adults, we go back and we reflect as we watch our children and grandchildren play in the park. And there's parks that have significance to different people. Front Park is known as the face of the city of Buffalo. Broderick Park is another small park in the district, and it's part of the Underground Railroad. That was the crossing points for the slaves who sought freedom. They used to come through the city of Buffalo, and that was the nearest point between the United States and Canada, and so they would cross the river, and many of them never made it across the river because of the currents. And I see many people come to that park, people that are from all over. They'll park their buses up on West Ferry, and they'll make their journey, what they call the Freedom Walk, to the park. And I see them, and to them it's significant. So when I became council member, one of the first things I did after talking to a lady named Lillian Batchelor was allocate funds to begin the process to restore what is today the underground part of the Underground Railroad. And the mayor has since come on board, and we've spent millions of dollars rehabbing the park, restoring the park, and we're continuing to do that. But people have different, it's a place where the anglers go to fish. It's a place that I used to go when I was a young kid with my uncle on the breakwall. LaSalle Park, I remember LaSalle Park in the stands. Everybody has memories of a park. And many people just sit at the park and they reflect and they contemplate things about their family and things that they're going through at a certain point in their life. And so I've become a proponent of green space and land use. I think that is very important to have a land use policy to dedicate more green space. I am a strong proponent in green space. I went to Washington, D.C. One of my only trips was to Washington with Samina Raja, and they showed Buffalo and things that are happening with regards to green space, urban agriculture, grassroots gardens. We want to make sure that there are more green space dedicated. If there's one thing the city needs to do is to have a land use policy, because if you look at the Elmwood Village, this is beautiful. This is, you have Bidwell and you have Delaware Park, but there are people that don't have parks, don't have pocket parks, don't have green space, don't have a place to take their children. And I think we need to do a better job in terms of dedicating green space for that and make sure that it's properly maintained. I'd like to see the city do a better job of maintaining its parks. I think we could do a lot better. And I use Olmsted as an example. I mean, I feel comfortable, I feel safe when I go into an Olmsted Park. I asked you to go to some of the other parks in the city of Buffalo, and you'll notice the difference in terms of its maintenance, its upkeeps, its equipment. And you're scared to let your kids even go down the slide because they're broken. So those are the experience I have when I go into the parks. There's so many reasons. When you go to different parks, it brings back different memories. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch.
Thank you. If we've learned anything from COVID-19, we've learned the importance of green space, especially, we're having to remain socially distant. And a lot of times, people are in their homes and are really, going out and recreating and knowing, how much their park really needs them. That's what I've heard a lot in my constituency as well. I didn't know how much these pocket parks or these green spaces mean to me when, we've been, locked in our homes for so long. But depending on what constituent asks me, I have two different parks because I don't want to offend them. But the first will be MLK Park that I share with 3 different districts. And it's really one of the focal points of the east side. Many of my constituents that live around it could, find themselves there blindfolded. I mean, they just know it's generational for them. And when you hear stories about those generational impacts of, that they'll tell you is, from their grandparents, or maybe they went with Cub Scouts, or maybe, they went for maybe a serious matter to talk about violence. Those parks are really used as communal spaces and bringing people together, for good reasons and sometimes for not so good reasons, for somebody that passed, but, also for the Juneteenth, so it has historical impacts to a lot of people that live on that side of my district. And the other is Days Park. And why I really like Days Park is it's really a kind of a funny area. You're a block away from Allentown, and you could you could kick the ball around and then go to DBGB's for a drink. And then there's a school on the other side that uses it as their personal playground. And I've learned one thing as council member is never get involved in a neighbor dispute, especially even if it's with children or grass. It can be controversial, but it really is a wonderful place because the homes that are around Days Park are also beautiful, and you really look at the historical standpoint of how that park was designed and how lucky those folks were that lived there. Were really right on the park. But you also see throughout the day the transition of people that are there. Days Park brings everybody there, and that's why it's such a gem in my district.
Well, thank you all very much. Do you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask of the council members? Come on up. Because you got to use the microphone so everybody can hear you.
That makes sense. Here I am. All right. Hi, I'm Maria. I had a couple questions based on what you guys said. The first was you mentioned about the city maybe doing a better job with land use plan in regards to its green spaces. And I was wondering if you were implying that that was something separate from the existing comp plan that you were looking for them to kind of develop and put into action there. And then the other question was someone had mentioned that at some point the city wanted to take the Olmsted parks back under their control, and I was wondering when that was, and obviously that didn't happen, so I was just curious about that. Thanks.
Sure. I can say one thing. In 2004 is when we worked with the city on this partnership, this public-private partnership. So the city was taking care of the Olmsted parks before 2004. That's when we came on board. And actually the Common Council is the entity that signs our contract. And we are currently in a contract until the year 2031. So, but I know that there were questions about land use and other.
You're right. It happened when shortly after I became council member in 2008, because I remember the groundswell of support for Olmsted was unbelievable. They came from all over, and as a matter of fact, I think we met at MLK. We had a big rally at MLK, and eventually the city gave in and signed a lease agreement with Olmsted, which we supported. The land use, we do have a land use policy for different things. We have policies for different things. Some of the land is being held for development, and that's fine. Development is great, and we want to make sure that we continue the development. However, we have to have a master plan when it comes to land use with regards to green space. If we can allocate more green space, the city is reluctant to add more green space because it means we have to take care of it, the cost of taking care of it. But other cities are doing this. When I went to Washington, I saw what other cities were doing out in the Midwest. They were dedicating space. Detroit, with all the demolitions that were going on in Detroit, they were setting aside land for parks. And I think wherever we have an opportunity, especially in certain districts and certain places within the city where we have large parcels of land, perhaps to set aside some of that green space. So we're going to build subdivisions or we're going to build housing. Let's set aside some green space so the neighborhood has some green space. I think that needs to be part of a plan when we're talking about future development, not just to develop buildings, but to also think along the way, we need to set aside green space for pocket parks, for kids to play, little parks, urban agriculture. I think that should be part of the mix, and I think we can do a better job of doing that and not be fearful that, oh, it's going to cost too much money, because it does improve the quality of life. It does bring people, if we're going to encourage people to move into the city of Buffalo, they're looking for certain amenities. They want parks, they want good education, they want safe streets. But I think park falls right in there. They want those amenities, and I think we can do better when it comes to that. And hopefully the Common Council in the future can work with our Office of Strategic Planning, because they're the economic development arm for the city of Buffalo, and they're the ones that do the planning, and they're the ones that have all the folks there. We want to make sure that, that they understand that the green space is very important. We did it in the Green Code as well, where we dedicated parkland in the green code, and Councilmember Feroleto and myself were very close in dealing with the green code and making sure that we have more green space. But I think we can still do a lot more than what we're doing, and I think we should have, that should be part of the master plan, is green space as well.
Any other questions? Did that answer the question? What? Okay, excellent. Any other questions for our council members? Come on up.
Hopefully there's none about the speeding cameras.
Speeding
No
cameras in the
questions
parks.
about
No
speeding
speeding
cameras.
cameras in the parks.
Hi, my name is Megan. Obviously, Olmsted does a great job keeping up with the parks and things like that, but do your offices have any sort of initiatives with getting the people in your specific districts involved in the parks, or setting up, maybe doing different activities and things like that within the parks that are in your district?
Thank you. So the question was, do our offices have initiatives or do things to get people to participate in the parks? So I think it was 2 years ago on Earth Day, the Earth Day before COVID, our office teamed up with the Elmwood Village Association, the Olmsted Conservancy, the Terrace Restaurant, Thin Man Coles, and we organized a massive cleanup of the Delaware Park and then also Elmwood Avenue, and it was a great partnership between the Conservancy, my office, and the restaurants, because we tried to make it fun, and everyone who participated in it got it was a 1 or 2 free beers and some free food after. There was a very fun after party. Our office also has participated in cleanups here at the park, but with COVID, it's been limited what we do. But another thing our office does is we try to encourage other organizations or people doing special events to utilize the other parks that are within the park system, because sometimes it feels like everyone wants to have their 5K or their walk or whatever event in Delaware Park. So sometimes you'll have, in some summers, there will be hundreds of applications for events in Delaware Park. So every single weekend, it's just nonstop events, and you have all these other beautiful parks that have no events all year in them. So I would like to see it spread out, not just in Delaware Park, but throughout all the parks throughout the city.
Well, I normally wait for Stephanie to give me a call and tell me what she wants. And normally I fund it. She'll always call and says, we need somebody to take care of our park. Can you fund it out of your member item, our neighborhood initiative? And we always do it. So always wait on Stephanie to make the call. We have a number of groups out there that do great. We have the East Side Riders. We have Vision Niagara. We have block clubs. We have Buff State that helps us with cleanups. My staff works on cleaning up the parks. I'm going to tell you, Front Park, which I represent, is well kept. And we do spend time on other parks that aren't Olmsted, that aren't as kept as well as Olmsted. And that's where we allocate the resources in terms of volunteers to make the parks look a little bit like the Olmsted parks. So, I mean, that's what we do in trying to keep our parks up. So we encourage volunteerism wherever we can. If somebody wants to come down, volunteer to clean the parks. But they come as far as the east side to help us take care of our parks. And I just want to make sure that they're recognized for all the work they do in keeping up our parks. But other than funding that my office does to Olmsted to make sure that we have somebody to take care of Front Park and the circles, we spend our times in other parks that aren't kept up as well as Olmsted parks.
Well, my colleague Joel provides beer at his cleanup, so now I feel like a bad council member only providing coffee.
We do.
But there are 2 main events that that my staff in my office organize to make sure that they're cleaned before certain events. So the first one is Eid, that the Muslim population has been celebrating, and it was just last week. And there's usually a team of them that come out and clean up MLK Park, usually a day or 2 before, so that when they do observe prayer, that it's that it's upkept. And the second is that I'll have next Saturday, but I'm in my now second year as council member, is we've had a community day where we promote bike safety and bike safety for children, so that we make sure that when children are riding in the park, they do have a helmet and that they are safe. So we team up with PAL and other organizations like the Peacemakers and Snug to come out to clean up the parks before we have those events.
Very nice. I learned something today. I didn't know about the bike safety. That's pretty cool. Any other questions? Come on.
Councilman, I was wondering what your thoughts are on, and I guess I don't really know the answer, so this would be a good question, I think. What are the chances that Olmsted Parks will be able to take more autonomy on providing and programming revenue building events and programs in their spaces, and allowing, majority of that revenue to stay with the Conservancy and allow them to grow, I guess, internally and move forward that way?
Thank you.
That's an excellent question, and I think the Conservancy and the city have started to work on partnerships where the Conservancy can have revenue sharing. Just a few years ago, the terrace wasn't a restaurant, it was only a banquet facility, and the Conservancy had an idea to turn it into a restaurant, and it took a little longer to get to happen than some people wanted, but it's tricky because all of the property that the Conservancy maintains is city-owned property. So it's city-owned, but the Conservancy runs it, so it's just, there's a lot of different nuances in terms of just, there's like an entire list that someone from the city law department would provide. But I think there should be opportunities for the Conservancy to have more revenue sharing events. Right now, the city has a policy, if there's any special event in a park, I think it's like a $500 application fee. I think that if the Conservancy is doing an event, the Conservancy shouldn't have to pay to have an event in the space that they manage. But right now, unless something's changed, I think the Conservancy has to pay the city $500 to have a Conservancy-led event here, which doesn't really make sense. So I think that certainly could be changed, and it should be changed.
I like that answer, Joel.
I think you have support for that. Yes, I agree with the council member that there are fees that the city charges they shouldn't charge. I mean, you're providing a service. You're doing great work in maintaining our parks. And we want to make sure you have the resources to maintain what you have here. And it's exemplified in different parks, as I said before. You can see the difference in the conditions of the park. And certainly that takes resources, and they need those resources. So I would be certainly in favor of making sure that more money stays with the Conservancy to continue the work that they're doing, and that we should be looking at how you're doing it and maybe emulate that in the city of Buffalo. So yes, programming and certainly, I don't know what your capital projects are during the course of the year and how you raise money and all the people that support the Conservancy outside the city, not only in the city but outside the city, where you have a lot of support for the parks here in the city of Buffalo, and all those philanthropic groups as well that support the Conservancy. I hope they continue to support the Conservancy. And the Common Council, especially, you have a number of council members that represent a number of your parks, and certainly you have some support on the Common Council to make sure that if it does come to a vote, that we're there to support you keeping the money that you make here in the parks. Thank you.
What do you think about Prospect being redone?
Prospect Park, which was Columbus Park for a number of years, and we just changed the name, and we're looking at doing some work at Prospect Park. I think it's a beautiful park. I think it's going to look great. We want to make sure the resources are there to do Prospect Park. Prospect Park is a new park. We're going to be putting up a sign in Prospect Park. I just want to thank the Italian American community who themselves decided to rename the park. After many years of being called Columbus Park, it was the Italian-American community that came to the city of Buffalo and say, hey, this is causing a lot of tension. And we understand that. And they were very sensitive to the indigenous people. And they themselves came to us and proposed it to Councilmember Feroleto and the administration. And they took that burden off of us, because every year at Columbus Day there was tension and there were protests and there was vandalism to the statue that was there. And so now there'll be a statue of Italian family. Early part of the century, the West Side was, many of the Italians that came to the United States in the early part of the century from Western Europe came to the West Side. And so it's going to represent a statue of a family that settled here on the West Side, because we want to recognize many of the contributions that the Italian-American community have made to the city of Buffalo, and that's going to be part of Prospect Park. We're looking forward for that.
Answered pretty well.
Don't. Did you have any that you wanted to? Okay.
All right. So, and the council works very hard with us. One of the other things that we worked on with our new contract with the city was for us to be able to set golf prices where we needed them to be as far as for competition. We're in an agreement that will still offer like the lowest price possible, but at least we have more flexibility so that in the fall, say that we've got a brilliant fall, we can drop prices or we don't raise, but if we need to drop them to stay competitive with other golf courses. So the council has been incredibly flexible with us in considering other revenue options for us. So like Joel said, as we continue to make every one of these kind of structures in the parks somehow revenue positive, that will help sustain their maintenance. So that's kind of the plan. If we can invest in the brick and mortar should be able to eventually pay for itself in sustaining it. So, any other questions?
I don't know what time we're at.
Too much.
Okay, no, you're good. Last question. Last question. Okay. Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Chris. So, Mitch, the way you described growing up with the newspaper at your grandparents' house sounds similar to how I grew up. I went the total opposite way. I want nothing to do with this. They're always talking. There's always something going on. This is too much. So I appreciate you jumping into the fire here. And so on the panel, you're a little bit unique in that you jumped right in as opposed to having a kind of independent career first and working in. Could you speak a little bit, like kind of your unique perspective there on how you plan to grow your career and help the community that's a little bit different than the other panelists? And David, you mentioned needing support from home in transitioning to your role now where you're on the hot seat here but in a beautiful rose garden. Is this really more difficult than serving as a police officer? Because your service there is appreciated also, and that also sounds pretty difficult. And Joel, so parks are one small sliver of everyone's kind of responsibility here. Stephanie's the ED of Olmsted, and she needed a cheat sheet just to know the parks in your district. Do you know that? Like, could you name all 8 parks? Because it's amazing to me what you guys do. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, you can go third to think about it. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And as a younger member that just went right into the fire and got elected at 27 years old, Brian Higgins summed it up the best when he was a council member, and he told me is to be a Buffalo council member, you have to be incredibly agile. You have to be able to have the lady yell at you at the phone because the snow isn't removed, but then you have to talk about city ordinances. You have to go everywhere in between and really be able to digest a lot of problems and do it very quickly. And you have to be able to do it with a sense of calmness because you are the closest elected official to people. So sometimes you are in rooms that are heated and that are tense. But I've learned that from David Rivera. It's that police officer training. He knows how to turn down the temperature of a hot room from 100 degrees to 55 really quickly, and that's a really important skill when being a local official. And especially when it comes to growing my career and where I'd like to see it go, is I am, really fortunate to represent such a diverse district and that has really diverse needs. There are times in Broadway-Fillmore where, I'm dealing with, shots fired, or I'm dealing with, pervasive poverty and generational poverty and vacant lands that, there's blocks in my district that they only have one house in them because of bad planning in the 80s and 90s, where we had officials that would have press conferences saying we're taking down all this derelict housing, but then they didn't replace it with anything, and then it just further moved communities behind. And now that I look at that part of my district, I have to now incorporate preservation, because Broadway-Fillmore is now a preservation district. But then I'm also have the wonderful immigrant population who's coming in and who's rebuilding neighborhoods from the ground up, and are really becoming a big focal point in the community and want to make that community their own. And when you grow a district, or you grow your career, it's because of the people that you represent. So everyone has different needs. Like the Bengali community, when I first got elected, or when I was running for office, I said, if you get in, you've got to help us get halal lunches in the Buffalo Public Schools, because we don't want to send our kids to private schools. We pay taxes, we want our kids to go to city schools, and we view this as an equity issue. So Councilmember Bowman and I teamed up to do that, to work with Buffalo Public Schools to make sure that inequity was addressed. And this fall we'll have almost 11 schools that will be offering those halal lunches, and eventually it'll be almost in the entire Buffalo Public Schools as they learn how to implement that. But then you go to the other part of my district and you have Allentown, which is really the crown jewel of historic preservation and how to be able to make a neighborhood so successful. And Allentown is the best example for that. But they also have certain issues with properties and upkeeping them, because they're so expensive to upkeep historical homes. And trying to find different pots of money from the state or from historic tax credits to be able to address those issues. But then you also have, I have a sliver, or a big part of the old First Ward in the Valley, and that part of my district is, whenever it's severe weather, is impacted greatly because of the proximity to the Buffalo River and to the lake, and having flooding issues. But also you have to deal with very specific issues in the sense of those folks can't afford flood insurance. It's $120 a month. There's no way that they can fork over that money to protect their homes. So how do you fix that? And especially when it comes to federal regulations that is now telling that neighborhood that in order for us to insure your home, or insuring your mortgage, you have to have flood insurance. But how do you find a middle ground? And Congressman Brian Higgins has really been instrumental in coming up with legislation and ways of making sure that if folks do want to have flood insurance, that it's not open to the free market for everyone to exploit them, and that they really have a way that they can afford those premiums every month. But those are a lot of issues to work on, and when you think about it, when you move higher up the chain of political office, you tend to deal with just big issues. But I'd like to see that, one day if I do make it to a higher office, that when I look at a big issue, I think of all those granular and nuanced ways of how does this impact neighborhoods, how does this impact local council members, how does this impact local municipalities, because, in our jobs, you have to think in that really specific and targeted way.
Good question. I worked in the Buffalo Police Department 25 years, and I worked almost every unit in the Buffalo Police Department with the exception of homicide. And I didn't work homicide because I didn't want to get called at 3 in the morning or while I was out to dinner, and they would call you and say, but I did go to autopsies, and I did do investigations, and I did interrogate many suspects that were Spanish dominant, because I speak both Spanish and English. But I worked sex offense, robbery, domestic violence, fraud, every unit. And so I saw the misery that is out there when you're answering 911 calls. I've seen broken homes, I've seen overdoses, I've seen almost everything you can imagine, and you take that home with you at the end of the night, and yeah, you dwell on it. My first homicide was in South Buffalo. I remember it as it was yesterday. The wife was 9 months pregnant and her husbands were shot in the back. And I remember that because we were taking him in the ambulance before he passed. And so you remember all those things. You remember the misery that you see every day. And then you become a council member. So I went from enforcing the law to talk about social justice, to talk about policing, to talk about police reform, to talk about things that the community feel are so important to them in terms of social determinants, racism and things like that. And those are things we work on right now in real time on the Common Council because of the things that you see across the country. The tension that you see with George Floyd and the things that you see on the nightly news and the tension that it brings here to the city of Buffalo, we have to deal with it as council members. I chair the Police Oversight Committee, and I think it gives me a unique perspective. I understand the culture and the need for reform because I worked in the Buffalo Police Department. I've seen some of the things that people see on the news. And certainly we know that there needs to be reform, and that's what we're working on. So it does create kind of a conflict for me because I have many police officers there are friends of mine, and they're good police officers. The great majority of them are just great police officers. I learned from some of the best. I was fortunate. You said that I'm able to calm things down. It was because there was an older gentleman that took me under his wing when I came out of the academy in South District, and he was so good at calming situations down. He could walk into a bar fight in South Buffalo and calm everything down, and that is not easy in South Buffalo. But he had that ability, that grace to talk to people. And so I worked with him, so I was fortunate. And I'd say, Dave, how do you keep your calm? It's because I had this officer from South Buffalo that taught me how to treat people, how to deal with people. And so I've taken that, what he taught me, to the Common Council. That's why you say I'm calm. It's because of what this police officer taught me. There are good police officers, and unfortunately, they all get painted with the same brush. There are bad police officers, and we need to deal with them. There has to be a better way of vetting police officers to make sure that they don't work outside the scope of the law. If you're working within the scope of the law, then you have our backing. But the minute you work outside the scope of the law, there should be a penalty for doing that. So it's not very easy dealing with many of the social issues, the poverty part of it. You know, we saw that many of the problems that were occurring in certain neighborhoods was because of poverty. We had to empower people. There has to be an opportunity for those people. I've had people come to me and say, Mr. Rivera, I don't want to deal drugs on the corner. I want a job. And your heart goes out to them. I've had prostitutes say, you know, that are into drugs, can you get me a bed so I can get rehabbed? I mean, I've seen all of that, and I may get on the phone and get calls and say, look, is there a bed somewhere they want to detox? Can you put them in some program to help these people? And unfortunately, many times they'll go into detox, they'll come back out, and they'll do the same thing. But that is part of what's happening in society right now. And so we can't give up on these people. We work hard to provide the services and the programs so they can have a second chance. And I strongly believe in second chances, and we need to give people a second chance. So it is not easy being a council member who was a former police officer, but it does give you an insight into what people are going through right now in the city of Buffalo and throughout the country. And we're doing the best we can to reduce the tension that is occurring. Because as you said, because of all the tension, people lack trust in the Buffalo Police Department. They won't give the officers information that may solve a crime, that may solve a homicide, because they don't trust police officers. So our goal right now is to develop trust between the community of color and the diverse community and the Buffalo Police Department. And I think that's what we're doing right now. And the Common Council has made many, many reforms. De-escalation, the carrier horn law, duty to intervene, the training that we allocate resources for. So there's many things that we're doing right now in terms of social justice. And we're going to continue to do that to improve the relationship between the Buffalo Police Department or law enforcement and the community of color as well.
All right. So the question was if I could name all of the parks and parkways within the Delaware district. So today I could, but when I first got on the council 6 years ago, I definitely couldn't do it right off the bat on my first day. But the organizations within the city, especially within the Delaware district, really do a phenomenal job in trying to work with their elected officials to educate the officials. So when I first got on the council, I met with the Conservancy. They went through everything that they do, not only in the Delaware district, but throughout the entire city of Buffalo, what the important issues are to Darwin Martin House. Right when I got elected, the executive director asked me to come there for a tour, said how many visitors they get per year, the economic impact it has on the region. So I think a lot of it has to do with the very strong advocacy of these not-for-profits and arts and cultural institutions within the city.
Thank you, Joel. I think we had one more question.
Hello. So I'm curious, you spoke to partnerships, like sharing some of the park spaces, and I'm curious like how that manifests, maybe some successes and challenges of sharing different park areas for you guys.
The question is about sharing park spaces. Anyone have a take that one?
Sure.
I know you deal with it all the time, Joel.
Thank you. The sharing park spaces is challenging a lot, especially the thing that I think of is Delaware Park, because as I mentioned before, it seems like every single fun run, 5K, 1 mile walk wants to be at Delaware Park, and a lot goes into it. It's not just 200 people show up at the park and then they leave. A lot of times you have to involve the Buffalo Police Department because they have to put up barricades and do traffic control in the area. A lot of times, you wouldn't know it because the Conservancy does such a good job, but a lot of times people come in for their special event, they leave, and it's a complete disaster. There have been times I've run around the park at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's like hundreds of pieces of litter, whether it's water bottles, plates, napkins. So when it comes to sharing space, a lot of times it seems like either the city or the Conservancy could be burdensome with requiring all these different things, but I think it's very important because we've seen so many times when the space is shared, unfortunately the people that are using the space don't necessarily treat it as their house. They just treat it as an event space they're at for 1 hour, and then they just pack up and disappear, and someone else is left to clean that mess. But there's certainly there's a lot of positive things that come up with shared space. I think the restaurant at the Terrace is a perfect example of it. There was a lot of resistance from some neighbors before it opened because they were concerned with, I can't even name it. I think there was a very long list of concerns that people had, but it turned out great. And if you come here any given night, you'll see it packed. Sometimes there's a wait, and a lot of it is the neighbors who initially had concerns about it. So I think just working out the details in the beginning is certainly worth it because that eliminates any issues or concerns that could come up after something's opened or after the shared space plan is in effect.
Does that answer your question?
I actually meant between like the council members, how they collaborate in parks that are shared spaces.
Oh, interesting. Yes. So Joel and Councilmember Pridgeon share Gates Circle, and Councilmember Rivera and Nowakowski share Symphony Circle. Mostly it's the circles, I think, that are truly shared, like half and half. Any comments about those shared spaces?
Other than Councilmember Nowakowski now knows that he shares the space with me, and hopefully we can work together to fund the Olmsted Conservancy to take better care of the circles. Thank you very much. But yeah, I mean, LaSalle Park, parks that are utilized, like Delaware Park, I think it's probably the most utilized park, is Delaware Park.
Actually, MLK has the most programming.
MLK has the most programming. After MLK, if you were to order
It'd be MLK, Delaware, Cazenovia, Riverside, then probably Front, and then South.
So the parks that I represent obviously aren't among those, so they're not utilized as much. So I don't have the problems of, the people coming in and parking on the lawn, not taking care of it. The only problems I would probably have is kids playing soccer and wearing down the grass. LaSalle Park, I border LaSalle Park with Councilmember Darius Bridget, and yes, there you see a lot of damage from cars parking on the lawn. When they have their concerts and they have their events there, whether it's the World Refugee Week or different events, Little League football, Little League baseball, you see the damage to the park, and hopefully we can, if they're going to utilize the park and we're going to allocate the resources, we do a better job of taking and working with the community in terms of volunteerism. What can we do to keep these parks up as well?
Do you want to say anything? No.
All right. So final comments that I'm going to ask the council members on is just if they have any thoughts of how to keep you all engaged with them in the Olmsted Park spaces. So it's kind of on the spot. But if you were to talk to a young professional and say how they could get involved or help in your district with the parks, give some thought to that. Joel?
You want to start? Work our way back?
I get to answer all the questions first. Thank you, Stephanie. I think it's great that the Conservancy started this young professional program. I think this is the first year. And I think it's great that everyone here is a part of it, whether you're civic-minded and want to do more in your community, whether you have a passion for the parks, whether your employer requires you to have to be part of a board or something. But I think it's great, and it speaks a lot to the people of the city. People always say Buffalo is such a great place because of its people, and it seems like everyone in Buffalo is very community-minded and wants to give back, and we don't see that in other cities, and people care about their neighbors, and it truly is the city of good neighbors. And for anyone here, I would encourage you to stay part of this organization or any other organization that you have a passion for, because when you're getting involved with different boards or not-for-profits, anyone could sit on a board somewhere and just show up to a meeting once a month or every 2 months, take a vote, and that's it. But if it's something that you're passionate about, then you'll put your heart in it, and you'll contribute much more to it, and you'll certainly get much more out of it.
Well, thank you very much for your volunteerism, your passion for the parks and green space. I look at many of the folks that are here. They're young, have many other things to do perhaps, but yet you have a passion for the parks and taking care of the parks and making sure it's a great place for our children and our grandchildren, and that we maintain these parks. And so I want to just thank you, and I ask you to stay engaged, stay involved, bring other folks with you. And when we have cleanups, we invite people from all over. They even bring their children to the parks for the cleanup. I mean, I was surprised about 2 weeks ago, we had a cleanup at Broderick Park, and we had the refugee kids come with their parents, and they taught them how to clean up, how to mulch, and how to do things. And I think at an early age, I think that's very important to show our kids how important, the environment is. And I think we need to show them from a very early age. So I was very happy to see young folks there to grow, and they're going to continue to do what they're seeing. So thank you very much for being engaged with Olmsted as well.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I would say, stay engaged to what you find, very passionate in your life. There's a multitude of reasons that bring people to parks. Sometimes it's, organizations like Big Brothers and Big Sisters that come together and bring, and mentor young kids and use the park as a meeting space or a place to play basketball or tennis or run and find a way to connect with one another. And others are, more cultural programs, and there's a lot of cultural programming, especially in the immigrant community, in Juneteenth, and people that use parks to celebrate the diversity in their life. And, so just following those outlets and becoming, extremely involved in them will eventually lead you to Buffalo's many parks.
Well, this is great. I think that's our wrap for the day, but I just want to thank our council members because their time is really precious, and to have them here for this long it just says a lot about their character and about what they go through, and just knowing the multitude of questions. I will end with this. When I first met Joel, I had to call him about something, and it was in the grand scheme of things probably pretty frivolous for a first time talking to a council member that was brand new on the job. And he had told me, Stephanie, I've already had 60 phone calls similar to this today. It's a good day, right? So these guys are so busy. They're very important. They're very dedicated. And I really appreciate all of your time for being here and for being so pro Olmsted and the work that we're doing. So thank you. And Katie, Sarah, is that it? Group photo. Thank you guys.